After experiencing the first God of War, I couldn't wait to jump right back into this franchise with the next game, God of War 2. Knowing this game was also built on the PS2, I wasn't expecting any generational leap, but I had heard from many that this was their favourite of the original trilogy. I was expecting this game to take it further and evolve in terms of gameplay and story. The game looks almost identical to the first game. Any graphical upgrade here isn't all that obvious. In fact, the UI elements almost look identical to the first game. As soon as I thought this, I was very much going to get more of the same, which I wouldn't be unhappy with, but what this game does is so much more. It's a sequel in every sense of the word, as it expands upon everything that the first game had built in a tremendous way. The combat was easily the best thing about the first game, and I feel like it had the least to improve here. But there are a few key noticeable differences between them. The first of these differences, and improvements here, were the boss fights. This game has a significant increase in the boss fights, and honestly I was shocked at how common they were, when the first game only had 3. From the Colossus, Theseus, Barbarian King Perseus, the Kraken. The sheer quantity of them was impressive, but so was the quality. I found the boss fights to be incredibly engaging, as they're all different from each other, but they successfully had used different skills and abilities Kratos had gathered to defeat them, and it also depended on what skills and abilities you chose to upgrade. The first one is a mix between boss and puzzle, a giant statue enchanted by Zeus that Kratos has to take down with all his power as the God of War. This mixes combat and puzzles wonderfully, as on the outside he's constantly a threat to Kratos, while inside it's more about discovering how to take it down and going place to place. Another is Theseus, a warrior Kratos must fight. I honestly found this one to be surprisingly difficult, as I found it hard to work out when he was vulnerable enough to attack. Another is the Barbarian King, which I found much easier in comparison to work out his pattern and quickly dispose of him. The Fisherman Captain of the first game shows up here, a nice callback, as well as a rewarding for taking the enemy's weapon after their defeat. There's the Titan Minotaur, the Urael, that you gain the same ability from the first game for defeating, Perseus the warrior trying to get further through the temple, a small interaction with an old disheveled Icarus, in which Kratos steals his wings, the Titan Atlas, the giant Kraken. The Sisters of Fate is a special one, as it's not too difficult but is slightly reminiscent of the Valkyries from God of War 2018, and take place partly on the giant sword Kratos had to use in the first game to defeat Ares. My issue with this fight, it's very easy to read what to do. It just takes a while of encounters, dodging and hitting, and after a while gets slightly tedious. Zeus at the end is both a great spectacle and thematically. Kratos and Zeus going back and forth over who gains the Sword of Olympus, as well as Zeus pulling out more and more moves from his arsenal as the fight goes on, increasingly getting more difficult. I found the combat in these fights to be intuitive and rewarding, if slightly a bit easy, but they may just be difficulty issue. A huge change in the combat though is the counter system. It was there and worked in the first game, but during the course of this game, Kratos gets the Golden Fleece, which significantly upgrades the counter button, allowing it to charge through enemy attacks, even ranged ones, back at them, and is essential for a number of boss fights. I also love how the Golden Fleece gives an in-universe explanation for why Kratos couldn't do that in the first game, but can in this. The QTE is a staple of this franchise, and it's returned here, but I'm thrilled to say they were significantly less annoying than the first game. The first game, the timing for them was so punishing, I found myself often failing, where here it's much more lenient and much less punishing. The puzzles in this game are heavily expanded on. In the first game they were very simple and largely involved around just simply moving objects. This game still has that mechanic, but it also expands upon it, with uses such as moving the objects to trap gates and keep things open, but it also brings in a few more key ones. A simple but effective one is being able to pick up certain bodies. This always acted as pressure points when they needed weight on them. And I like to think of the creative uses, such as when the body had to be moved around to the appropriate location through the river. The most obvious one is when Kratos gains the Amulet of the Fates, and that gives him the ability to slow down time when there's a statue with a green glowing orb around it. Not only does this create and blend the time puzzles from the first game more effectively, it gives the player more agency in working out the puzzle. Not only this, but there's another aspect in moving the statue where it gets the most effective slow down time to progress past the puzzle. Not only is this a great gameplay mechanic, it also works thematically, with the main plot being driven by Kratos' desire to time travel. I felt that the first game did a bad job initially of explaining what elements in the environment were interactable, but the mechanics were pretty basic, so you quickly understand what is and what isn't. This extends to this game though, and I felt that throughout they kept throwing new ways to interact within the environment, which made experimenting with the environment and working out the next step much more rewarding. The base movement is identical to the first game, the same 1 speed while running and then the ability to roll. There are significant upgrades in other aspects though. First being the climbing is now much faster, and jumping between different sections is more streamlined. But also, Kratos can now zoom down, making it much more engaging. Another is the ability to grapple hook. This basically is the rope swinging mechanic from the first game, but allows the player to create more of their own way through the environments, and have it be much more reliant on their timing and positioning. The last is when Kratos takes Icarus's wings. Kratos can glide through with the wings, allowing travel over much greater distances in the air, and also used in puzzles where there is wind that can blow Kratos up. The game starts in Rhodes, which is reminiscent of Athens in the first game, and from there Kratos is largely in different temples leading to the Sisters of Fate. This, like the first game, is one cohesive story. From the moment we start as Kratos, there is no breaks or time passing until the end of the game, even when Kratos dies. While I don't see any noticeable graphical upgrades, there certainly is in design, as the temple Kratos explores feels less varied than the locations from the first game, but certainly more detailed. The major difference in the world design, though, is through additional exploration. At the end of the first game, I had almost everything upgraded, because, well, most of the additional chests were in obvious locations. In this, it's very different, as by the end I had few things upgraded, and not even all my health was. I didn't go off the beaten path too much, and my playstyle didn't change from the first game. In fact, when I did fight them, they were mostly well out of the way, which is very rewarding for players who like to explore. In fact, I found one only accessible by going off the beaten path during a slowdown time area in the middle of a puzzle. That was rewarded specifically with Gaia giving Kratos more health. I fell in love with the story of the first game. Kratos' tragic backstory and his journey of revenge that ultimately is completely unsatisfying to him, still having to live with the horrors he committed. The game opens with Kratos fueling all the anger from his own actions being into an almost villainous god of war, leading Sparta to victory. Kratos directly defies Zeus, which Zeus doesn't like and ends up taking away his godly powers and killing him. Kratos once again survives, with the help of an unlikely ally, the Titan Gaia. She explains the only way he can defeat Zeus is to go back in time to when Kratos can use the Blade of Olympus, which stores his godly power. The first game set up the gods as helping Kratos take down Ares as he had gone too far. This reverses this, as our friendship with the gods have ended, and the Titans are our best friends now. The cutscenes in the first game largely were used to tell the backstory of Kratos, while in this it tells us the history of this world, and largely the conflict between the gods and the Titans. It also is used to explain our powers, whereas in the first game we had the rage of the gods and the powers individually bestowed upon Kratos by each god. In this game, the rage of the Titans is what fills up much quicker, and each power is bestowed upon Kratos by individual Titans, even if their attacks are almost carbon copies, such as Zeus's lightning from the first game becoming Typhoon's bane, or Medusa's head being now the Uriel head. Learning the backstory of the gods and Titans seeks to villainize all the gods, but mostly Zeus, as we learn that Zeus is the son of the Titan Kronos, who would demand to eat his children. Zeus's mother tricked Kronos, and Zeus grew up and took revenge on all the Titans, simply for the sins of his own father. Kratos' main point of contact is the Titan Gaia, but we also see him befriend others such as Atlas, where we learn Kratos was responsible for Atlas being in his current situation. Throughout this game, being exposed to Kratos becoming slowly but surely more bloodthirsty and brutal. We used to see him dismantle monsters, sure, but we see him killing a fair few humans in this game, and innocent ones at that, brutally sacrificing the translators, seemingly without a second thought. What Kratos is going through is absolutely breaking him. This ultimately culminates with Kratos finding the Sisters of Fate and successfully going back in time to fight Zeus right at the moment he is killed in Rhodes. After a tense back and forth battle, Kratos is on the verge of killing Zeus when Athena, the only god that is still willing to help Kratos, shows up by sacrificing herself to save Zeus. Zeus runs away like a little bitch to warn the other gods of Kratos, while Athena explains she did it to save Olympus. Athena also drops the bombshell that Kratos is Zeus's son, which of course anyone with a passing knowledge of Greek mythology could see that coming from a mile away. And that history is repeating itself, and Kratos cannot continue the pattern of sons killing fathers as Zeus did with his own. This hits even more close to home, knowing and having experienced Kratos with his own son Atreus, and their conflict there. Kratos, with the power of the Sisters of Fate, goes back in time to save the Titans before they're wiped out by the other gods, and to bring them back to his time. The game ends as we see them climbing up Mount Olympus to bring the fight to the gods. I'm assuming this would pick up directly with God of War 3, which I could not be more excited to play, as I've heard great things about it, and will surely bring everything into context, with Kratos moving to the Norse pantheon after this game. I feel God of War 2 is such a great sequel in a gameplay aspect. Combat is improved slightly, but largely continues and builds upon what was so great about the first game. There's so much more to the puzzles, and I feel like a true evolution in that sense, as well as giving Kratos more options in terms of movement. The only part I don't feel lives up to the first game is the story. The temples aren't nearly as memorable or iconic as Pandora's temple from the first, and while this game has great things in it, setting up Kratos being betrayed by the gods, and particularly Zeus, and setting up the history between the gods and the Titans, and the backstory, particularly leading up to the third installment, it doesn't feel as personal to Kratos as the first game did. Obviously, as that was telling his backstory, and the story here is mainly used for world building. It still makes me care more about Kratos, but particularly feels like part 1 in a 2-part story, which I'm assuming will directly pick up when I get around to playing God of War 3. I do feel like the game does a good job of motivating Kratos and his continued vendetta against the gods. He feels wronged, and we see Kratos starting to slip into being significantly more brutal than he was in the first game, showing him truly losing his humanity. As for where the story eventually goes with 2018, it's hard to say, as obviously 3 will give significantly more context into Kratos' actions. But whereas the first game told Kratos' backstory, making him tragic, this seems to be telling the part 2 to that tragic story, and Kratos slowly descending even more into a violent monster. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I'm having a blast playing these games through, and I cannot wait to pick up with God of War 3 very soon. After that, I'll be moving on to the spin-offs with Chains of Olympus, Ghost of Sparta, and Ascension, and then coming back to 2018, having my full experience of this franchise. So if that sounds like something you want to see more of, subscribe, as well as from there we'll be doing other gaming content. And if you like this video, leave a like and let me know what your thoughts are on God of War 2 in the comments. Cheers, and have a good one.